This estate was worth nearly $5 million. I had spent years building a life here, far from the noise of the city. The property was legally mine, and every document was in order. But one HOA president had decided I didn't belong here. Margaret showed up without an appointment that morning. She marched onto my property like she owned the place. She told me the HOA had received complaints about my estate. I asked her to explain exactly what I had done wrong. Her complaint was surprisingly simple. She claimed my property was damaging the neighborhood's appearance. I looked around at my perfectly maintained estate. Then I asked her which part she thought looked bad. Margaret told me I needed HOA approval for changes to my own property. I reminded her that my estate had been here long before her complaint. She didn't like that answer, so she threatened to call the authorities. I wasn't intimidated by her threat. I simply told her to make the call if she believed she was right. Margaret immediately pulled out her phone. She had no idea who would answer that call. A few minutes later, several sheriff vehicles entered the driveway. Margaret stood there smiling like she had already won. She pointed directly at me and told the deputies to remove me. I simply waited to hear what they had been told. One deputy walked toward me while the others stayed near the driveway. He looked professional and completely serious. Margaret kept talking over everyone, demanding that I be removed. Then the deputy finally looked directly at me. The deputy stopped for a second. His expression suddenly changed from serious to surprised. He looked at me like he'd seen an old friend. Then he smiled and said something Margaret never expected. "Good to see you, sir," he said with a genuine smile. Margaret's expression changed instantly. She had expected the deputies to treat me like a trespasser. Instead, the first deputy clearly knew exactly who I was. Margaret suddenly stopped shouting. She looked from the deputy to me, then back at the other officers. Something about their reaction had completely changed the situation, and she was about to learn why the sheriff's department knew me so well. Michael had seen me many times before. He knew exactly who owned the estate and why I was there. Margaret had called him expecting an eviction. Instead, the deputy was greeting the actual property owner. Michael finally turned toward Margaret. He calmly explained that I was the legal owner of the estate. Her confident expression disappeared almost instantly, but she still insisted that the HOA had authority over me. Margaret pulled out a stack of HOA documents. She insisted they proved I had violated neighborhood rules. Michael read every page without interrupting her. Then he asked her one very important question. Michael asked where the legal order was. Margaret said the HOA documents were enough. He explained that an HOA notice wasn't a court order. For the first time, she had nothing to say. Michael checked the county property database right there. The record confirmed exactly what I had already told him. My name was listed as the owner. Margaret's name wasn't anywhere on it. By then, several neighbors had come outside to see what was happening. They had heard Margaret shouting when the deputies arrived. Now they were watching her story fall apart in real time. Nobody seemed willing to defend her version of events. Michael asked if I had my property records with me. I told him I did. I handed him the folder I'd kept for years. The documents made the situation even clearer. The original deed was still in my records. It showed the estate had been legally transferred to me years earlier. There was no dispute over ownership. Margaret had simply assumed the HOA could override the deed. Margaret wasn't ready to give up. She claimed the HOA had warned me before and demanded enforcement. Michael calmly told her that warnings didn't change property ownership. Her entire argument was now standing on nothing. Finally, Michael gave Margaret the answer she never expected. He told her she had no reason to remain on my property. She slowly lowered her folder and looked toward the driveway. But before she left, I knew I had one question for her.